Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
So many people have an instinctive suspicion, you could say almost an animosity towards big business, that they exist to benefit a small elite, not for everyone's benefit, and they exist to serve themselves, not the world. There are very good reasons that those perceptions exist.
Dating right the way back to the 1960s, you had Rachel Carson, began by shining a light on the activities of the pesticide industry. The world was genuinely shocked by a succession of major leaks and spills, such as Union Carbide and Exxon Valdez, which many of us may remember, caused terrible suffering, huge environmental damage, huge human toll as well of some of these big accidents. And then, of course, well known, the dark arts of the tobacco industry. And of course, sweatshop labour broke when parents in the rich world were horrified to discover that the presents they were buying for their children at Christmas time were made by other people's children in sweatshop factories under forced labour conditions, often in poorer countries. People becoming very concerned about the supersized health crisis, big food companies marketing to kids, and big pharma. This is an industry that's supposed to be making money by making people well. We're hit by a string of scandals, fabricating results, cooking up fake diseases, including people in trials without their consent. New industries bring new areas of friction. So currently we have concerns around invasion of privacy, around the misuse of personal data. The red hot area at the moment is, of course, corporate taxation. And how can it be fair that these vast corporates are declaring billions in profit, yet seem to be paying no tax? And the public response to this has been captured, in recent years in slogans such as "We are the 99%." It seems often as though business really does exist just for the benefit of this small 1%, but we don't think it's the full story. These big companies are huge concentrations of skills, of capital, of people, of resources. They can mobilize at scale and at speed. They can also be really big engines of positive social progress.
We spent time with a number of big companies operating all over the world, some of them based in the US, in the UK, in Africa, in Asia. And these are some of the biggest companies in the world. And you get a sense of how big these beasts are when you get close to them. Unilever buys a vast amount of agricultural raw materials. For example, 12% of the world's tea. GSK produces vaccines at an enormous scale, dispatching 900 million doses around the world every year, 170 countries. At any given time, there are 400,000 people in the air on airplanes powered by Rolls-Royce engines. And Coca-Cola, of course, famously has a worldwide distribution network which serves almost 1 billion servings of Coca-Cola products a day somewhere in the world. And when we went out, we met people at all levels of the company, from the boardroom right out to the front line and out into the supply networks, indeed to the far end of the supply chain. And we talked to customers, we talked to their partners, we talked to their harshest critics. And so the stories we're telling in this book really are of real people in real businesses doing real things to try and affect change. We felt that we were seeing very clearly why big business is everybody's business. And we think that there are 4 reasons. The first is, big business is in everybody's life. Every time we send an email, charge our mobile phones, fill our fridges, take a painkiller, have a shower, book a holiday, enjoy a beer in the evening, you can count on the fact that there are a number of very big businesses that have mobilized to make that happen. So we need to understand them as an integral part of society, not as something separate from it. Second, big business is everybody's responsibility. We know that we have to get involved and take an interest. And what we learned is that you need to take an interest in companies too, and that they have the capacity to change and adapt once you engage. Third is, big business does need to work for everyone. We've lived through a time over the past few decades, I think we all know now, which really has had shareholder interest as the absolute priority for big listed businesses. But what we found is that increasingly corporates are aware that their choices, their decisions, actually need to work for everybody involved. And fourth, we're asking a question. Can big business help to fix the world? You can think of a big business as a concentration of skills, of resources, of expertise, and they're waking up to their own potential to use this power to have a positive impact. Often the traditional way of talking about these things is that you say, well, business is adding social benefit, and people imagine you're talking about the philanthropy. What we're looking at is the core activities of a business and how it does business. We see examples of many companies which are actually growing their businesses by joining the global effort to tackle some of the toughest challenges in the world today. And they're drawing on the resources and the capabilities at their disposal to ask a question, a very simple but powerful question: how can we help?
One of the striking things I think that we found putting this together was that very often the companies who are today's leaders in thinking about the role that their business plays in the world, very often those companies were actually yesterday's villains. We think of these companies as having been on a journey in a way, and these journeys have got a lot to teach us. So this is the hallowed campus of Nike. And so if you rewind back to the 1980s, you have a very aspirational global brand come from nowhere in a very short space of time. And you had the CEO, Phil Knight, at the time, would go around talking about this as being a company with a purpose. And the purpose he would describe as being to enhance people's lives through the magic of sport. All wonderful stuff. But of course, looming over the horizon was a major controversy about Nike's practices. Back then, Nike already had as many as 500,000 people working in factories making Nike products. But not a single one of them was a Nike employee, and not a single one of those factories was a Nike factory. And so as stories began to emerge about sweatshop conditions in these factories of child labour even, Nike's first response to that was actually, they're not our factories. That's not our problem. That's not our responsibility. The public outrage around it became really deafening for Nike, and it came to a head in 1998. The CEO stood up. He gave a landmark speech at the press club in DC, and he basically stood up and said, this is our responsibility to worry about. We need to change this, and we need to set new standards for the industry. They began by saying, well, okay, we'll have a code of conduct for all our suppliers. But pretty soon they realised that actually they would need to work with their suppliers to help them implement this code of conduct, which meant they would have to partner with civil society groups. But in order to partner with civil society groups, they had to become a more collaborative organisation, which meant they had to embrace transparency. And so Nike became the first ever company to completely publish transparent details of its entire supply chain. It also led them to creating the Global Alliance for Workers and Communities, and the Fair Labour Association subsequently. It's so interesting that responsibility now has become such a sort of vanilla term actually in business, corporate responsibility. But back then it actually really meant something. And so Nike founded the first corporate responsibility department. Over the years, Nike have become a leader in environmental issues too, and they've done something here quite radical. They've taken their product innovation department, and they've taken their sustainability department and they've smashed it into one entity, which they call Sustainable Business and Innovation. So they fused innovation and sustainability together. Most companies, of course, would typically do it the other way around. So, you design a product, you manufacture it, and then you assess it for its environmental impact. But doing it this way around really means that you approach design in a very different way. And a great example of this in action from Nike is this, the Flyknit trainer. This shoe, as the name suggests, is knitted from a couple of long pieces of thread. And that brings together significant environmental benefits, as well as economic savings for the company. So this year, when Fast Company published their list of the most innovative companies in the world, Nike was number one.
And that is quite a journey for Nike over more than 10 years. The idea of business being on a journey became a very central theme for us, and we started that journey in Uganda. About 25% of the people in Uganda live in absolute poverty. And what you're seeing in that landscape in there somewhere is mango trees. And that was of interest to Coca-Cola. There are fewer people drinking fizzy drinks all the time. And they set themselves a major strategic goal to triple the size of their juice business by 2020. Well, actually, that demands a lot of fruit, and actually more fruit than there is in the supply chain at this time. And that led to the creation of Project Nurture. This is Coca-Cola working with 54,000 smallholder farmers across Uganda and Kenya. And this stated aim of the project is to increase the farmers' productivity and to double their income, alongside securing supplies of high-quality fruit. And these are very small holdings, some of them just half an acre. And often the farmers didn't even realize that their mango trees had any value to them. And of course, Coca-Cola can't work with every single one of these 54,000 farmers. And so they have to work through an intermediary, and they engage TechnoServe, which is an NGO, global NGO, working on the ground with them in this part of the world. And they act as the delivery partner. And the first thing TechnoServe does is to form farmers groups into collectives. And through this project, they have learned to plant better, to protect the trees from pests, how to prune better. And they've been supported by TechnoServe in actually taking their fruit to market, which means literally the closest big town, but it also means producing quality enough mangoes at consistent enough standards to get them into the supply chains of producers. And the farmers told us that only a couple of years before, the village was suffering from what they called biting poverty. They could not feed themselves. And thanks to this project, they've been able to lift themselves out of poverty. And they told us with immense pride that it's now them, the farmers group, that is paying the local teacher in the school. And they're very keen to stress, this isn't a handout. Nobody has given us anything, they said, only advice and information and connected us to the market. They started in 2009 with 18 members, and as other farmers in the area started to see the benefits, they joined in, and there's now 275 farmers involved. And they're starting to save up for a pulping machine so they can get even more value from their mango trees. But it is actually the nature of today's global supply chains. The biggest brands in the world connected to the smallest economic actors in the world. And one of the biggest questions for global business is how can they act in such a way that benefits everybody involved all the way along the chain?
And what we found is that whenever you're talking about the role of business in society, you're actually only talking really about a limited number of things. The same 5 themes kept on re-emerging. And so we think of it as a kind of prism. First, the purpose of the company. What are you for? Second, the products that it makes. Third, the practices and processes behind making and distributing those products. Fourth, any philanthropic initiatives that it chooses to undertake. And fifth, the point of view it has on the issues that are relevant to it. It's interesting to see how a sense of purpose has crystallized in the big Silicon Valley companies as they become aware of how they're really shaping the world that they're in. You can see this in companies like Google, who came to define their purpose as to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible, or in Facebook, who described their purpose as to make the world more open and connected. And of course, it might not be that the founders of these companies sort of set out with this fully baked sense of a social mission, but it grows as they recognize the impact. There's this sort of positive reinforcement that takes place as they recognize the significance of their work. As Zuckerberg puts it, building a mission and building a business go hand in hand.
And second, we have the products that a company sells. This, for example, is a jet turbine engine. It takes 18,000 precision parts to come together to make an engine like that. The dimensions are measured to an accuracy of less than the width of a human hair, and it involves hundreds of suppliers around the world contributing into that one product. But at a time when all of us know that aviation is the fastest growing source of carbon emissions, it doesn't actually look like we're going to stop flying very soon. Most of us in this room, I suspect, do some flying. Every year, Rolls-Royce dedicates almost £1 billion to R&D, the majority of which these days is dedicated to fuel efficiency. And if you look back over the last 16 years, this engine now is 16% more fuel efficient than the one when that program began 16 years ago. And it ratchets up year on year.
Third, we have practices, so how a company actually does business. So Unilever makes lots of products which many of us take for granted, shampoo, soap, washing powder. But in rural India, you can really see what these products can mean to people when you meet people who are washing their clothes with rocks in the stream and washing their hair with mud. And Unilever was convinced there was latent demand for these products, even in the very poorest people in the country. But of course, people living on a couple of dollars a day can't afford to buy a box of washing powder. Plus, there are over 600,000 villages in India, many of them very hard to reach. And so it was clear Unilever had to find a new way of doing things. And the first breakthrough famously came with single-use sachets of products to make them more affordable. But then they had to build a network to reach these people. They are trained, they're set up as small entrepreneurs with products to sell in the villages. Currently, they cover over 100,000 villages, reaching about 3 million households every month. And it's growing. So they're currently selling airtime in a partnership with a big Indian mobile phone provider. They're offering banking services to previously unbanked villages. And so you've not only got a powerful distribution network for Unilever, access to products for the people in the villages, but also an empowerment network for the women.
Fourth, we have philanthropy. There is still a very significant role for philanthropy, and there's a new generation of corporate philanthropy emerging. Take the Thomson Reuters Foundation, for example. Reuters is well known as the biggest news agency in the world, and so the foundation has become a champion, really, for quality, free press, training journalists in war zones and in areas around the world where the media is challenged. Thomson is the biggest legal services firm, and they've created a marketplace to connect NGOs to pro bono legal advice, and they run information services on human rights issues and legislation. This is a much more strategic approach to philanthropy and represents a big step forward because it can make a bigger impact in the way it draws on the core activities and competence of the business. It's hugely motivating for the people in the businesses, and it's emblematic of the heartbeat of the business itself. It tells you something about what the business is there for.
Finally, you have point of view. We see how in the 1990s you had Big Pharma absolutely vilified for aggressively enforcing patents on HIV/AIDS treatments in Africa, even whilst millions of people were dying of the disease. So it's really striking to hear Andrew Whitty, GSK's CEO, spelling out a very different point of view. We have to move from being a supplier of drugs to being a partner in delivering solutions. We need to stop saying it's not our fault there's no infrastructure to deliver healthcare, and start saying who can we work with to ensure that infrastructure does exist. So a very different point of view that leads to a very different set of behaviours.
And there are companies in all sectors who have been on this kind of journey of transformation, even the more unexpected industries like the mining industry. We did hear one senior executive in a mining company tell us how the point of view of the industry has changed and the journey it's been on. There was a time, he said, when the industry didn't even know what damage it was doing in the communities or in the environment. Then the industry knew, but it didn't really care. Then the industry realized that it had to eliminate any negative impacts it was making, and now the leading mining companies know that they have to make a positive impact in the local areas where they work, or they lose their license to operate. This isn't a static picture. It provides some basis, we think, for hope.
For people in businesses thinking about the role their businesses can play in society, this, we hope, is a practical way to get to grips with that. And for people outside business working to tackle some of the big challenges in the world, it gives us some clues, we hope, about how we might harness the power of these big beasts. We think this is about getting beyond whether it's good or bad, or whether who's to blame, or who do we point the finger at, or how did we get here. It's about recognising where we are right now and what's to be done. And we've learned that what matters most actually is the direction of travel of a business. So everyone can see what the challenges are, and the question is, what's your point of view on that problem? So we think it's about looking at our business and asking, are you trying to be part of the solution? And why should we believe in this business?
One of the business areas that you probably don't mention that much, although there are a couple of pages about it, is the big bad banking sector.
We agonised about this, as you might imagine. The way this works is businesses have to set out on a journey, and we found that really banking is only just starting on this journey. So what we do write in those few pages is about, I think, our empathy for the fact that a lot of people have a sort of fury about the situation and want the banks to say they get it. And I think you could say that there are some that are beginning to say, we understand and would like to get going on this journey. We'd like to see whether we can respond to the challenge you're throwing at us. But right now, we didn't actually feel there was that story to tell in this part of the world.
We met some very interesting banks in some other parts of the world, however. We were in Nigeria and we met a bank called Access Bank. it really helps you to see in a very different context, in a very fast-growing economy, what a bank can mean. When you've got providing access to banking to people, simply that, working with big businesses to provide banking facilities to employees and to provide credit to suppliers and to distributors. And this particular bank, Access Banks, are on a crusade for doing clean business in Nigeria as well. It's a reminder in a way that actually, banking can mean something profoundly positive to a society. You
hear all businesses now, especially under pressure, looking for innovation. And the kinds of companies we're talking about are actually, well, as your Nike's story was saying a moment ago, they're actually using that pressure as a trigger to innovation. And if you're using that pressure as a trigger to innovation, it may well be in energy efficiency, or it may well be in the redesign of materials and that sort of thing. So it isn't a trade-off. That's the key. For companies that are doing it this way, it's not a trade-off. Does the world pressure you? Of course it does.